I'm Curt Dupriez, this is Chasing Cars, and this is our test track that regular viewers will no doubt be familiar with. With its white lines and its street signs, it looks like it's actually on-road, but it's actually an off-street facility. But it's not Mount Panorama, it's not Phillip Island or Germany's Nürburgring, the kind of red-hot, adult-oriented racetrack that Porsche had in mind when they created this, the 992 generation 911 GT3 RS. And good luck with that test track, because the Porsche is going to be using a whole lot of you today doing stuff like this. But before we delve into too many details about how the GT3 RS goes, let's have a look at some of the basics about what it is. Porsche's 911 is arguably the most thoroughly evolved car that's ever been created. And of the staggering 26 different variants that Porsche Australia currently offers, 3 of those wear GT3 badges as the ultimate driver's tools. Kicking things off is the bonkers regular GT3, which is for track fans, although there is a touring package if you do want to tame down a little bit more for road use. And then there's this, the mighty GT3 RS, which is the closest thing you can get to a race car with rego plates with any badge and for any budget. This is the last stop in the road car showroom before you have to go to the Porsche Motorsport catalogue and the technically related GT3 Cup car. Its concept is very old school, including the fact that it sits a flat 6 engine behind the rear axle in fine 911 tradition. There's no turbocharging, there's no electric motor assistance, and it's classic rear-wheel drive. In many ways, it's a simple beast, chock full of Porsche heritage. And in practice, it loads in a lot of Porsche Motorsport pedigree. Unlike regular 911 stock, the bonnet, the front guards, the doors, the roof, and the rear wing are all made from carbon fibre reinforced plastic, and it weighs just 1,450 kilos. It has active aerodynamics, which can adjust itself depending on how it's being driven. That includes a whopping rear wing that's large enough to have its own postcode, as well as what's called an aero bar on the front axle, which can add up to 40 kilograms of downforce at speed. While it's not the prettiest 911 out there, all the vents and wings serve aerodynamic or cooling purposes. Then there's the impressive rolling stock. So the widest GT3 in existence yet fits 20-inch wheels on the front with 275mm rubber, which is usually reserved for high-performance machinery on the rear axle. Then there are the anchors. So this car fits optional carbon ceramic brakes with 410mm rotors and 6-piston calipers. The rear wheels though are 21 inches, and these rims can be had in standard forged alloy or, as fitted here, magnesium. The tyres are a whopping 335mm wide. The rose jointed suspension is adjustable for toe camber and anti-roll stiffness, and you can set the constantly adjustable active dampers to taste using a dial on the steering wheel. It also fits all-wheel steering, so the rear axle counter-steers at low speed for manoeuvrability and goes parallel at high speeds to promote stability. It is an absolute weapon, and it's born of a time-honoured motorsport recipe that really puts the chassis and handling first, and then you fit a powertrain that suits whatever motorsport class you want to go chasing. And that's why the engine is a relatively straightforward 4-litre flat 6 with no turbocharging or electrification. But climb in and crank it over, and you soon discover just how extra special this wonderful engine is. It has a rigid valve train, forged pistons, titanium conrods, and dry sump lubrication. That adds up to featherweight inertia, and it's unbelievably crisp when it comes to throttle response. But the real party trick is when you select drive on the 7-speed dual clutch transmission, point its nose to the horizon, and start chasing its 9 grand red line. Listen to that, 386 kilowatts, about 517 horsepower, which is utterly amazing for 4 litres of naturally aspirated 6. It's 465 newton meters of torque. It's hardly outrageous, but really, it's not the point. What's really important is this engine is absolutely razor sharp in response and absolutely flat when it comes to power delivery. Tapping out power is Porsche's 7-speed PDK dual clutch gearbox, and it's a modified unit with shortened ratios, specific for the GT3. Porsche developed its PDK for motorsport around 40 years ago, and now for road cars they really do make the best in the biz. The shifts are clean, seamless, and utterly perfect, and you can access that, of course, through the paddle shifters or through the conventional transmission controller, which is oriented the correct way, which is back for upshifting, as you would find in motorsport. Left to its own devices, the PDK calibration is absolutely faultless. It just whips up and down, finding the exact gear ratio that you need at any moment to pile on the action stations. And the gear ratios are so short that when you're out on the highway, 7th gear and top, the engine's ticking away around 3,000 RPM when you're at the speed limit. As a powertrain, it's utterly remarkable and devastatingly effective. But the real crowning achievement of the GT3 RS is its chassis. It's totally brilliant in that it hardwires the driver to how the car is interacting with the surface below on road or track. What's really clear to me is that even at this relatively hot pace, this GT3 RS is only really just starting to get into its sweet spot and into its zone. It's clearly got so much more talent and headroom than what we can possibly uncork here. Of course, it does exactly what great sports cars do, in that it gets better and more reactive the harder that you push it, all the way through to 10 or 11 tenths. And I'm quickly discovering that the talents of this car completely outstrip our humble little test track here, at least when it comes to race mode. So let's dial it back a bit and switch to sport mode, which you can do from one of the dials on the steering wheel here. So I can do a little bit more thinking and talking, a little bit less about keeping this thing on the blacktop. For my money, Porsche really got on top of the compromises of the rear engine format in its 997 generation that it launched 2 decades ago. What Porsche managed to do was dial out some of that classic spooky front end float and dial in a lot of rear end grip and predictability. 2 generations and 2 decades on, what Porsche's engineers have managed to tune into this chassis is nothing short of utterly remarkable. The steering is perfect. The clarity and weight are perfect. The feedback is perfect. It's so sharp that your steering inputs are actually very surprisingly modest. The front end grip is phenomenal and predictable, and the balance is really matched beautifully by those 335mm tyres out back. Needless to say, it sits flat in any corner, and the combination of the huge amount of grip in the rear steer just allows it to rotate beautifully, even on these really slow speed hairpins. Build up speed, and the downforce really drills that grip into the road, which makes it really stable at high speed. That said, at speed, the car can be extremely alert, almost to the point of being nervous. And those incredibly powerful brakes allow the confidence to brake extremely late in the corners. And you do find that you only need just really small inputs, even when you're pedaling this GT3 RS really quickly. There's also another dial on the steering wheel, which is the Porsche Torque Vectoring Plus, which can adjust the rear differential and the torque distribution across the rear axle. There's also another dial for traction control and stability control, and of course, you can turn all of those safety nets off. However, when you're not on a qualifier, you do dial it back a bit. This still feels every part the thoroughbred race car. And despite all that tech at play, this is still a hugely organic and intimate driver experience. But regardless on how much you want to manhandle this thing and chuck it around, it always feels like it's on your side. What an incredible car. Downsides? Well, there are some characteristics to this car that won't be to everybody's taste, but they are intrinsic to the hypersensory experience that you are buying into. For one thing, the tyre roar can be absolutely deafening, and that in itself is going to be pretty fatiguing. The same goes for ride quality, which is pretty good for a race car, but in terms of lumpy back roads, it's really not well suited. You will be spending lots of time avoiding those potholes, believe me. In this particular configuration, these seats are also a tailor-fit proposition. The one-piece carbon fibre bucket seats bolt into place, so you do need a spanner if you want to adjust them precisely to where you want them. It's fully mechanical, but there is an electric switch on the side where you can tailor the height to tune in under thigh support. If these one-piece buckets aren't perfectly adjusted to suit you, you will get backache. However, Porsche does offer an 18-way electric Sport Seat Plus that is a lot more luxurious and nicer for on-road use. Otherwise, the cabin is simple, old-school charming, and uncomplicated. And that extends to the time-honoured analog central roundel tachometer. You don't get a head-up display, and the speedometer is just a small display in the middle of the tacho, but really, when you're in the heat of the moment on track, you're not really looking at your road speed. The trim is a combination of leather and fake suede called Racetex, so the rest of the cabin really is a little bit uncomplicated apart from the carbon fibre finishing. So you do get things like these little flappy fabric door handles. You do get lesser sized door pockets like you find in off-roaders, which do secure drink bottles and the like. As you would expect, the driving ergonomics are next to absolute perfection. And while there's not a huge array of flashy tech in here, there are enough creature comforts that make it a nice place to be for a long country drive, at least on smooth roads. You do get dual zone climate control, wireless CarPlay, and if you tick the options box, Bose audio, so it's not exactly what you call a stripper in here. Punters who do want to get serious can go for the no-cost option Club Sport package, which adds a steel bolt-in half cage, a fire extinguisher, and a 6-point harness for the driver. But if you do want to open up the purse strings a little bit wider, there's more that you can add to your GT3 RS. Die-hard buyers can splurge on the Weissach Pack, which saves 22 kilograms by adding a whole host of goodies, including a carbon fibre roll cage, carbon fibre detailing and suspension tweaks, and lightweight magnesium wheels and detailing such as the paddle shifters. Hold on to your wallets, track fans, because it's time to talk pricing. The basic GT3 RS costs around $540,000. Added to your $500,000 investment is the 76 grand for the Weissach package plus 9 grand for specific Weissach interior trim. There's 6 grand's worth of dynamic light system plus headlights and a whole host of other goodies, not to mention the 20 grand splurge that you need for the carbon ceramic brakes. It comes in 4 standard colours and 4 optional colours that cost 7.5 grand, but none of them is this unique signal yellow which Porsche calls paint to sample. And someone at Porsche Australia must really like mangoes because this signal yellow paint costs over $32,000. And if you want the key colour to match, that's another $780. Total cost, $690,000 as it sits here before on-roads or before you point it at a racetrack. Running costs, well, you get a 3-year warranty and 12 months, 20,000 kilometre servicing intervals. And you might just see 13 litres per 100 if you decide to drive it like a princess. But if you want to drive it as nature intended, it's going to be pretty exy. Exy on tyres, exy on fuel, and exy on regular maintenance if you do point it at the racetrack. So who would buy a device such as the 911 GT3 RS? Well, the answer is pretty straightforward. Someone who's wealthy, someone who has a 4-car garage, and someone who's a die-hard motorsport fan. And it's for someone who doesn't want to deal with the complexity of buying a dedicated race car, a trailer, a transporter, and all the hassle of hauling it to the track when you can just turn the key of the GT3 RS and just drive there. And of course, anyone who wants to drive the closest thing you can get to a race car on a public road. It's not the most pragmatic 911 for road use, but of course, that's why Porsche offers so many flavours for different tastes and different budgets. In fact, my favourite of the current lineup is the 911 ST, which fits the carbon fibre reinforced bodywork of this car, but without the wings and the fanfare. And unlike this car, you can have it with a conventional manual. But as a very particular car for a very particular buyer, boy does the GT3 RS deliver large in what it says on the box. And in terms of fitness for purpose, it's about a 47.5 out of 10. Truth is, the GT3 RS's capabilities are so lofty that it should be more car than most owners will ever have the brave pills or skills to cater for. So perhaps, in a way, the craziest part about the car is actually those rego plates. So that's what I think, but how about you? Put your thoughts in the comments below and tell me what your ultimate driving car is. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.